Hey everybody, PlanetWalls here from MTGO Academy. I wanted you guys to be able to see the classic deck I brewed and am piloting in the Classic Quarter Classic League for the 2012-2013 season. The way this tournament works is it's broken up into a couple of smaller 5-round Swiss tournaments that, as far as I know, I think this is right, they each have a top 8 cut. With donated prizes from the community. I think there are more than 40 people playing. I want to say 42. MTGO Academy has donated about 100 tickets prize, not to this first tournament, but to the overall tournament structure, which culminates in an invitational later on next year. So I built this deck, and I guess I would kind of describe it as a casual deck, but I actually don't know enough about the format to know if that's the case. I say casual because I sort of started with a concept that I wanted to, I sort of wanted to experiment and see if it worked. So I guess experimental is better than casual. I do fear that it doesn't have enough consistent power, as it were. So it's got power, but not consistently so, and I don't think it works against all matchups. Plus, there's a lot of artifact hate anyway in the format. And so obviously you probably see a lot of artifacts there. Sorry, some of the cards are highlighted in red. I had to take myself off. I logged off basically, and for some reason it's highlighting some cards and not others as being in my collection. But I do own all these, and so forth. But anyway, I guess I'll get into talking about each card, and then I'll provide some summary thoughts. And you might find yourself embarrassed as I discuss some of the decisions I made and then later reflected on why I think I should have made other decisions. So the mana base here looks a lot like a classic workshop deck mana base, and you can check out Enderfall, Scott's, his real name Scott, his screen name is Enderfall. He writes Unlocking the Vault for us. It's a classic series that we have in the Academy. So you can check out workshop decks there. The mana base of this deck looks a lot like a workshop deck's mana base, sort of hybridized with an affinity, classic affinity builds mana base. So one thing that, for instance, Legacy does not have access to for Affinity, Modern, certainly not, are cards like Mishra's Workshop. So this is a powerful land. Interestingly enough, though, it does not produce mana that you can use for artifacts' activated abilities. You can only cast artifact spells. So that's worth noticing. It's still incredibly powerful to be able to ritual out something from the land. It's nuts. So the deck sort of thrives on that sort of mana boost. I'm only running one Disruptive Strip Mine. A lot of decks will run 4 Wastelands. Most workshop decks do. I took a hit there. I decided I didn't want to render my mana base quite so... I don't know. Well, it's sort of silly, see, because I've got these Vault of Whispers here. I needed some kind of artifact land. Probably should have gone with the colorless, indestructible one, Darksteel Citadel. At the time, I had a 3-drop that cost black, and then I think these should be Great Furnaces, or possibly a mix of Great Furnaces and Trees of Tales, rather, because of Birthing Pod, which I'll get to. But it's sort of a silly land here. I guess I can cast the Flashbag out of the board, or the Ley Lines out of the board when we get to that, or the Salvage Titans, though. Finding a way to cast Salvage Titan, hard cast Salvage Titan is pretty tough. And you got Mox Opals, too. So 16 land, pretty light. As many affinity decks do, and even a lot of classic decks in general, but it's a little bit deceiving because there's a Mana Crypt, 2 Mox Opal, Soul Ring, and a Mana Vault. So if you don't know these cards, I guess I should pull this out a little bit to make sure you guys, people who may not know what these cards are, know what they do, and that's only fair. So Mox Opal is a recent card, and you're probably familiar with it. Mana Crypt is an immediate mana boost for 2 with the caveat that you will be taking 3 damage, roughly half of your upkeeps. Though I've beaten opponents in classic testing games where they just sort of lose every flip, and I somehow win a race I shouldn't be allowed to win. So, you know, it's consistently powerful, inconsistently damaging to the player who casts it. There's Tolarian Academy. This card has the capacity to be hugely explosive. I kind of don't know if it's the best card in this deck. I think it's better than Gaia's Cradle, which I was trying out. But I would draw hands that had like a Gaia's Cradle and Tolarian Academy in it, and that just wasn't very good. Since it does produce a lot of mana quickly, though, we used anything for activated abilities even. I do think it's pretty powerful and worth running, obviously, but it just, I wish I had some way to take advantage of being able to add like 6 mana to my mana pool most of the time. Strip Mine, it's better than Wasteland. You get to play one in Classic. It's unfair when you rip it off the top. Sometimes you'll just pull this off and you'll be like, well, that was unfair for my opponent. I got to Strip Mine their only land, or their key land, or their important land, or their basic land, and I can Wasteland the rest. Obviously, I don't have Wastelands in this build, but so forth. Again, these Vault of Whispers, I needed an artifact land to be able to make Frogmite relevant, more relevant, rather. And I chose Vaults. I probably should have chosen something else. Probably Tree of Tales makes the most sense, because Birthing Pod's activated ability costs a lot of life. I would not be surprised if I lost rounds in this tournament because I had to pay so much life with a combination of Mana Crypt, Ancient Tomb, which is another mana boost that's pretty painful, and Mana Vault. So we'll move to the 1-drops. This thing is basically Dark Ritual for colorless, and occasionally you get to untap it and use it again later. It deals damage to you each draw step if you didn't untap it during your upkeep. So, Soul Ring, again, another powerful mana source. You'll find these in a lot of different Classic decks that can utilize the colorless mana consistently. Grim Monolith is another mana source that I forgot to mention earlier. So you pay 2 and you get 3. It's like Soul Ring, kind of. I guess probably a little bit worse most of the time, but it's still, like, I don't know, adding 3 is pretty good. So, yeah, Grim Monolith is good. I mean, Classic, you have access to all these powerful artifact mana sources. There's Metalworker too, which would be in the 3-drop slot if I were running him, but I'm running so many high-cast colored guys that, unlike most Metalcraft Workshop decks, or MUD in Legacy Mud or whatever, I couldn't really take advantage of it the same way, because my hand wouldn't be entirely artifacts, or the cards I was trying to cast with the mana that I made with Metalworker weren't colorless enough consistently to be able to be cast. So now we'll get to the concept of the deck, which I guess I've left off until now. Basically, the idea is I wanted to see if Birthing Pod would be playable in Classic. And at first I tried to use Mirror Enforcers, which are like Frogmite, if you aren't familiar, but they cost 7, have affinity for artifacts, and are 4/4 mirror creatures. So I tried to run those. I found that I wasn't able to actually get enough artifacts on the board quickly enough. I could test this again with a retooled version and see if it worked, to make them relevant and be able to Birthing Pod them. So the idea is you can quickly get out a 7-drop and turn into an 8-drop with Birthing Pod, and the 7-drop is basically free. The problem also is there aren't that many good 8-drops. So there's Avacyn, there's Grizzlebrand. Grizzlebrand, obviously good. Costs a lot of life. Sometimes it gets killed, though. There is that new guy with the hoof, Crater Hoof Behemoth. That guy can turn your board into he quickly decimates them if you have enough creatures on the board. Basically, the 8-drops are actually relatively unimpressive in Classic. You want something that can either disrupt your opponent or end the game quickly, or just do something. There's Sundering Titan in the 8-drop slot too, but that's inconsistently good. Some decks don't even run any basic lands, and a 7/10 just isn't good enough. Especially if it can just get killed by an Ancient Grudge, right? Or a Nature's Claim. So, the idea then was to figure out a way to utilize other cards available in the Classic format that are powerful for other reasons in order to Birthing Pod up to high casting cost creatures that were effective as quickly as possible. Birthing Pod can be cast with a Mishra's Workshop on turn 1. It's not as effective that way sometimes, but with other mana sources you can even do something with it on turn 1. It's pretty good under those circumstances. Again, you have to pay a lot of life, something worth considering, even in a format that sometimes where the game ends, where you're getting hit by a Blightsteel Colossus for, like a bunch of poison damage, or where you're getting locked out with Vault Key, right? So sometimes the life doesn't matter, but a lot of times it actually does, especially in the format that, as Enderfall has been noting in his Unlocking the Vault series, is being increasingly dominated by creatures, sometimes just Grizzly Bears. So Chris Kuhl, from our website too, the COO of MTGO Academy, is also playing in the tournament, and he's playing a green-white Hate Bears deck. Runs a lot of guys like Thalia and maybe Leonin Arbiter. I'm not sure about that. Yeah, definitely running Leonin Arbiter, actually. Just some disruptive 2-drops, Gaddock Teague, and it just tries to like beat down the opponent with 2/2s. So it's an interesting format. There's a lot of tension in the format. Like, how much consistency do you sacrifice for an incredibly powerful game plan? And then there are decks that can sometimes ascend to the top by doing something that you wouldn't even think is powerful in Modern, for instance. Where the deck basically looks like a bad Modern deck, but it can win because it's so consistent and disrupts the opponent's fragile plan, basically. So that's like one of the tensions in the format. To capitalize on it, you have these Phyrexian Revokers. So if you name Lotus Petal with this, for instance, or if you name Soul Ring or Skull Clamp, like, I wouldn't name any of those in this deck. Well, I might name Lotus Petal, but I wouldn't name Mana Ball or Soul Ring when I have one out anyway. But the idea is you name a non-land with this guy. It's a little bit different than Pithing Needle, where you can name a land, but it prevents mana sources from being affected by the Pithing Needle, because Pithing Needle says, you know, non-mana abilities can't be activated. Well, Phyrexian Revoker just says name a non-land card, and then all activated abilities. So you can name, like there's an Elves deck that runs Glimpse of Nature. You can name Heritage Druid or Priest of Titania. Basically allows you to mana screw an opponent. Jace is often a win condition in a lot of decks. Charbelcher combo, you can name the Goblin Charbelcher. It's a disruptive 2-drop that can be equipped with Skull Clamp in the 1-drop slot to draw a bunch of cards, or it can be potted away into one of these Junk Divers. It's an incredibly good card. It's good in the deck. I was originally skeptical. I had like a Ravager here, and I was only playing 3 Revokers because I wanted like a quick win condition, like a standard Affinity deck. It's not worth it. This guy's great to draw. Should take a step back and look at the 1-drops. So I didn't know whether to use Hex, Parasite, or Heap Doll. I can't believe I'm saying this, but I think these are the 2 best solid 1-drops in the format. I did not want to run Vault Scourge, even though I could pot them up into a 3-drop, because I wanted to be able to have some flexibility and pod these guys up into Phyrexian Revoker in some circumstances. So Heap Doll, you can exile a card from a graveyard. This is occasionally useful in matchups where your opponent is using a bunch of graveyard tech, basically. So you can ruin their plan. A Dredge deck, you can pop it and exile their Bridge from Belows and a Dredge card, because you get to sacrifice your Heap Doll. Hex Parasite, on the other hand, is sort of an anti-planeswalker measure. Occasionally there are other cards that use counters. If my opponent plays a Gemstone Mine, I guess I can sacrifice some tempo with a Hex Parasite out to kill their land. Something to that effect. So it's not extraordinary in the deck, but it's something there. I wasn't sure how to divide the Heap Doll and Hex Parasite up. Again, I don't know that much about the format, but I wanted to experiment with both these cards to see if they were even playable. And I think they are. Again, both can be equipped with a Skull Clamp for a quick 2 cards drawn, which is excellent in the deck with 29 creatures. You'll find another creature to equip. Junk Diver and Mirror Retriever. Okay, so I didn't realize how powerful these guys originally were. I was playing stuff like Ravager, a much more expensive card with respect to its pecuniary characteristics on the Magic Online economy. But Mirror Retriever, so it dies, you get another artifact card from a graveyard. I didn't realize this guy was good. I was playing only 2 of them because I didn't really know what I was doing yet with this build. And I played a Salvage Titan, which I'll get to later, which allows you to sacrifice your creatures. And I sacrificed Mirror Retriever, or sacrifice your artifacts, I'm sorry. Then I sacrificed a Mirror Retriever alongside a Mana Crypt and a second Mirror Retriever, I believe. So I had both Mirror Retrievers, sacrificed both. Was able to get back one of the Mirror Retrievers and the Mana Crypt, replay the Mana Crypt, and basically recuperate a ton of tempo and cards even after sacrificing 3 artifacts. I was really impressed by that. I tried to play more of them, and I found that when you sacrifice them with Pod, you can get back a powerful card that your opponent had removed with some of the removal spells in the format include Nature's Claim, Ancient Grudge, of course Swords, which you could not circumvent with the Mirror Retriever Junk Diver. Junk Diver is the same thing as Mirror Retriever, only has flying, costs 1 more. So you can pod into Junk Diver, and so forth. Get back lands killed with Wasteland, for instance, if they're Vault of Whispers, that is. So I like the flexibility of Mirror Retriever. Does something in the late game. I'm shocked that I think it's actually playable. Not sure. Someone might look at this deck and say, I can't believe this functions. I don't actually know if it functions all that much. I've been trying it. It looks to be functioning. Got a couple other brews I want to try later in the season. Sorry I'm talking so much. You guys probably want me to just stop talking about this deck. So Birthing Pod is the engine that the deck runs on. You can draw it with Skull Clamp if you don't draw it in your opener or rip it off the top. That's fine. The deck can win without it, certainly. And I'll show you how later when we get to the Salvage Titans. It's sort of an aggressive game plan, basically. But Birthing Pod is a serious threat, and the opponents have difficulty dealing with it once it's done a couple things, 1 or 2 things. It's hard to recuperate from the advantage of having so many powerful creatures on the board. Frogmite can come down as early as turn 1, and you can Birthing Pot it into a 5-drop, which I'll look at soon. It's funny because 2/2s in this format are actually effective. They can attack into Jace or Tezzeret the Seeker or Tezzeret the whatever, Agent of Bolas. So Planeswalkers are vulnerable to Frogmite at its 2/2 body. So it can actually tangle with stuff, which is kind of humorous. And it's relevant body, basically. Lodestone Golem is a key disruptive figure in the deck. Normally you pod to him, occasionally draw him in your opening hand. It's a card that Workshop decks run 4 of because of how powerful it is. I could be running more of them in the main. There are 2 in the board, you'll see. So I think it's really good. I think it wins games sometimes. You can just, oops, I win with it. It's also a 5/3. Unfortunately, it can be killed with artifact removal, and it can be killed with lightning bolts. So, Precursor Golem in the 5-drop slot. Not sure about this, bro, because he turns all these golems into targets for your opponent, and I have no way to take advantage of that myself. So in all honesty, this Precursor Golem, it's a 5-drop artifact that can win the game quickly in the red zone if you get it out early, and you can get it out on turn 1 with a Workshop and a Mana Crypt sometimes. And in those sorts of events, it's really sad for your opponent. I'll come back to this awful card in a minute. Don't think that's constructed playable. So, alongside Precursor Golem, we have Acidic Slime and Zealous Conscripts. Acidic Slime kills a land, right? It's important. Maybe a 4-drop should be able to kill a land too. So maybe I should be playing Uktabi, Orangutans, or no, Ravenous. What's the name of that card? Ravenous. Somebody knows the name of this card before I do, guaranteed. Not Ravenous Rats. Ravenous Baboons? That sounds right. Ravenous Vampire, that's not it. Ravenous Trap. Why are there all these numbers? Okay, Ravenous Baboons. Yeah, that should probably be a 4-drop in my deck. I should at least be able to board that in. Killing a non-basic land is pretty good in Classic. Acidic Slime has the added versatility of being able to kill an artifact or an enchantment, which is relevant much of the time. Zealous Conscript, so a standard card, huh? Yeah, this was played in pod builds. You'll see this in some of Michael Hetrick's, that's Shipithala on MTGO Academy, playing this in his pod build. You occasionally get to win games from nowhere with it. In Classic, you can take their Time Vault and take an extra turn for free, which is kind of funny. You can take their Blightsteel Colossus and win if they just dropped it the turn before. You can take their Planeswalker and activate it, and do something silly. It also, and this is one of the funniest and most useful ways in which Zealous Conscripts work, you can tap or untap you untap the permanent you gain control of, right? So you can target your own Birthing Pod with it, untap it, and then immediately after attacking, sacrifice the Conscripts to find a 6-drop. So in the 6-drop slot, we have a Duplicant, which is, basically the only removal spell this deck has in seriousness. It can deal with more or less anything. Can't deal with a Dark Depths Mirror Age token, but it can deal with most stuff. And so there's that. That thing can be hard cast pretty easily too. Then Salvage Titan, which is a 6/4. Unfortunately, it's basically vanilla, except for the way it's cast. You can sack 3 artifacts to pay its cost, or rather than pay its mana cost anyway. And then you can exile 3 artifacts from your graveyard to return to your hand. So it has some synergy with Skull Clamp. It has synergy with Mirror Retriever and Junk Diver, and you can play it very quickly. So you can use that to Birthing Pot into 7-drops very quickly. 7-drops I've chosen for the main are Gaia's Revenge, which it's a clock, really. And I'm shocked as to how difficult it is for decks to deal with this. So if they get their Blightsteel Colossus out, that copes with the Gaia's Revenge. They can Phyrexian Metamorph it, but they can't Swords it. It's hard for them to Pernicious Deed it. They can't Jace it because it can only be targeted by non-green spells or abilities from non-green sources. They can block it with an endless line of Hate Bears. They can just block with Guy, so it gets blocked pretty easily. But I guess if they're playing creatures that can block it, you want to go for the Elshnorn at the top of your pod curve. Elshnorn, it kills Delvers, which are important in the format right now, and it makes your crappy guys like Mirror Retriever and Junk Driver and Frogmite relevant enough that they can smash in there for a win quickly. So that's the main deck. Feel free to ask questions about that. I'll get to the sideboard real quick. A lot of this is going to be fairly obvious. Some of it is going to be mystifying to you and perhaps to me too. So we've got these 2 ley lines and the 3 Tormod script. That's the standard graveyard hate package for my deck. So here's my thought process about this mix. I want to have enough artifacts in the graveyard removal slot so that I can use them to make Frogmite relevant. Also, I can recover them with Mirror Retriever, and also I can use them to sack to make Salvage Titan come into play from my hand. So that's why I have all those. They can also be cast easily, even with a Lodestone Golem out. So in that sense, I think that they're pretty effective in this deck. You want to mix a little bit, though. I don't think you want to rely on too much. I don't want to play Grafdigger's Cage, because that makes Birthing Pod pretty bad when I'm playing it. If my opponents are bringing in Grafdigger's Cage, I might even board out Birthing Pod or board out some of them. I don't really have a lot of good ways to interact with that, unfortunately. But Leyline of the Void, I wanted to put 2 in there. 1 or 2. The idea is they sometimes turn dredge games into auto wins for you. I don't want to mull until I find one, usually. So sometimes you'll play against a dredge deck, and dredge obviously relies heavily on the graveyard. And maybe if you're playing 4 of these in your board and you board them all in, you want to mull until you have one in your opening hand, and then it makes it very difficult for them to do anything and interact with you. Dredge basically doesn't interact with you anyway. You can see an article or a blog post that Simon Gertsen wrote for his Tumblr on Dredge and why it's so interesting that this deck it basically changes the rules and tries not to interact with the opponent. But anyway, Leyline is sort of this bizarre pre-game interactive card that makes it very difficult for them to win. And so when you draw 4 of a card, or when you play 4 of a card in your sideboard and move them all in, there's the chance that you have multiples in your hand when you start. I don't like that, so having 2 ley lines is usually not much better than having 1 in your opening hand. Sometimes it's a little bit better. So Chain of Vapor, I guess, does something. They can play Echoing Truth, though, and bounce them all anyway. So I didn't like the idea of handicapping myself with multiple ley lines when I could also play Tormod's Crypt, even though Leyline is slightly more powerful as far as graveyard hate goes. So I put in a mix of those. I'm still seeing how I like that. Thorn of Amethyst gives me the option of turning the deck post-board, generally on the play, when I'm on the play, into sort of a workshop deck, like a watered-down workshop deck. I'm playing very few non-creature spells, and so it gives me the opportunity to drop this and make my opponent's life miserable, keep them from casting anything. Flush Bag Marauder is just kind of humorous. It deals with, well, it's more than humorous. It's a 3-drop. 3 drops are lacking in the deck. Effective, interesting 3 drops anyway. Could not find any that were castable in theory and also relevant. Could not find any. This guy can also be Skull Clamped pretty easily to draw some cards. And I guess he's a creature that fits in an interesting slot in my deck's curve, and also deals with some serious threats that are in the opposing deck. In addition, 2-drops are fairly easy to come by, and so if you have your pot available, you can tutor them out and make their Blightsteel Colossus go bye-bye or something. Lodestone Golems, same as the Thorn of Amethyst, I already mentioned these, it's a powerful card. I figure I will be boarding them in with some frequency, though I don't know that for sure. I forgot to talk about the Summoner's Egg, I'll get to that, don't worry. Indrik Stomp Howler is another acidic slime, but it doesn't hit lands, so I could have put in another acidic slime, but I wanted something that had a little bit, gave me a little bit more versatility with artifact destruction in the 5-drop slot. So sometimes you want to go for a 4/4 Beast, and sometimes you want to go for a 2/2 Death Touch that kills a land. I don't know. This guy's castable sometimes with Mox Opal. Frost Titan's an interesting card, the 6-drop slot that can slow down a control deck or debilitate it for a while. It's hard to deal with given the I don't know what you call that, like Ice Shield clause here. So an effective creature can end the game quickly. Maybe it should be in the main even instead of Duplicant. Not sure about that. Duplicant's just hard castable, which makes it, I think, better most of the time. Let's talk about Summoner's Egg real quick. Summoner's Egg gives me something to do when I have a Gaia's Revenge in my hand, or an Elesh Norn, or a Zealous Conscript, or an Acidic Slime. So given how many of these almost uncastable cards there are in the deck, I need something to do with them. And the deck has trouble playing cards like Brainstorm or Jace because of its shitty mana base. Summoner's Egg can be tutored up. It's a weird 0/4, and it can be potted away. And so you can find something like a Zealous Conscript, and you get to basically put a card from your hand into play. It's the precursor to Clone Shell, but it gives you a little bit more control since you know what's going to be in your hand. That being said, it's a 0/4. Playing 0/4s for 4 is usually pretty bad. Haven't had an experience with it yet. Might be constructed unplayable in every sense of the term. So last we'll get to these guys. Just in case I run up against like a burn deck in the tournament, I want to have a card that makes it nearly impossible for that burn deck to win, and this is one of it's a new card, it's kind of fun. It's a 7/7. Sometimes you can use it to gain life if you're lower than 7, and it can end the game quickly. 2. So then Tyrant of Discord. So this guy, I had never even thought of playing this guy, but when I was looking through the 7-drops, I thought to myself, wow, Classic is such a weird format that sometimes your opponent has like 2 lands on the board and 50 million other permanents. So, at the very least, this is like a Sundering Titan insofar as it kills at least one of their lands, or kills one of their lands. It's definitely going to kill one of their lands, and they have to sacrifice it when it does. Sometimes it kills a bunch of their other permanents and you just win the game. So it's interesting that this card basically it gives you some flexibility insofar as you have something to look for that might be able to just ruin their game if you're lucky. That being said, it definitely kills a land, and in a matchup where they're going to have a ton of permanents on the board, some of these peculiar decks, but very few lands, like Elves deck is like this. Sometimes it'll have 2 forests and like 15 elves out before they've actually effectively comboed off with Glimpse of Nature and so forth. This will probably kill a lot of them. Don't know how it works. Never actually come out in testing. We'll see how this goes. So I hope you enjoyed looking at this goofy deck. I don't think completely unplayable. Maybe bad in the metagame given high density of artifact removal. My first matchup is actually against Enderfall with Scott. So my guess is that he's going to beat me. I'm hoping that the games will be interesting. I think if I beat him, it'll be based on either some of the disruptive elements of my deck coming out, or he might... I mean, Classic, anything can happen in Classic, right? So you can mulligan down to 5 if you're unlucky, because decks play so few land in general, and then you just get screwed because you have no land. And so I don't want to hope that that happens, but that might be one of the best shots I have. But yeah, looking forward to it. Looking forward to continuing to play this deck for the first round of this tournament. So, see you guys soon.